What would you do if your own daughter called you just the babysitter, and thought you'd never hear it? My name's Iris, and for years, I believed being a good mother meant staying silent, showing up, no questions asked. But one overheard conversation cracked that silence wide open, and what followed changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and myself. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below, I'd love to hear from you. I still remember that Thursday afternoon. Late October, with the kind of crisp air that makes your knuckles ache and the leaves crunch louder under your feet than they should. The light in the kitchen was soft and gold, spilling across the table where my tea sat going cold. I'd just finished folding a load of the kids' laundry, and I was giving myself 5 minutes to breathe. The house was quiet, except for the distant sound of cartoons drifting from the living room. My daughter and her friends were gathered in the kitchen, not far from where I sat, just on the other side of the hallway, really, but they didn't know I was still in earshot. That's when I heard it. "She's here all week," my daughter said, laughing. "Free babysitter. I mean, what else is she gonna do, really?" I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Another voice, one of her friends, I guess, chimed in with a smirk I could hear through the wall. "At least you're giving her purpose." They all laughed. Easy, sharp, thoughtless laughter. I just stood there, holding a damp dish towel in one hand, and stared at the floor like it could swallow me whole. I don't even know how long I stood that way. Long enough for the laughter to fade. Long enough for the tea to get cold. It wasn't the words themselves that cut deep. It was the ease in her voice. The certainty. The way she said it, like I wasn't a person but a convenience, like a crock pot or a vacuum. Something that made her life easier without needing to ask or say thank you. Funny, isn't it? How you can spend decades of your life loving someone, giving them everything you have, only to become background noise in their story. For years, I'd been going back and forth between my home and hers. 2 or 3 days a week, sometimes more. I cooked, cleaned, watched the kids, sat up with them when they were sick, picked up groceries, even folded her husband's shirts back when he still lived there. No one asked me to. I just did it, because that's what mothers do. At least that's what I told myself. And maybe I needed it too, needed to be needed. I'd been alone for a long time, since my husband passed, and those 2 grandkids gave my hands something to hold on to again. I thought I was helping. I thought I was wanted. But that day, I realized I'd become invisible in my own family. Her kitchen was sleek and polished, granite counters and smart appliances and a fancy espresso machine she never used. I used to think it was nice she had all that, like maybe I'd helped give her a better life. But now it felt like standing in a showroom I didn't belong to. There was no seat at that table for me. I wasn't part of the picture. I quietly walked back to the guest room where I kept a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and the novel I never finished. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the open suitcase in the closet. They didn't see me. They saw what I could do for them. There's a difference. I didn't cry, not yet. I just sat there in the stillness, listening to the laughter still echoing from the kitchen like it was coming from a different world. I folded a sweater, placed it carefully into the suitcase. Then another. And another. At some point, I heard her voice again, closer this time, maybe checking on the kids or pouring more wine. I didn't go out to meet her. I didn't say goodnight. I just zipped up the bag, placed a note on the dresser that said, "Heading home for a bit. We'll check in later," and quietly left through the side door. Walking back to my car, the air hit different. Sharper, colder than before. The street lights had just flickered on, and a few leaves skated along the driveway behind me like they didn't want to be left behind. I remember thinking, maybe this was my fault. Maybe I'd trained them to treat me like this. Maybe I'd given too much for too long without asking for anything in return, and now they didn't know how to see me any other way. Or maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change that. Maybe it was time to stop showing up for people who couldn't even bother to see me. I didn't know what would happen next. I just knew I couldn't go back, not like before. Not as the babysitter. Not as the helper. If I was going to be anything, I wanted to be a person again. Just me. I didn't leave angry. That's the part people never seem to understand. I didn't slam a door, raise my voice, or make a dramatic exit. I just packed up the few things I kept in that guest room, my toothbrush, a pair of soft slippers, the cardigan with the missing button, and I left a note on the kitchen counter. I need some time. I'll be home. That was it. It was early morning. The house still smelled like last night's garlic bread and toy clutter, the way it always did. The dishwasher had stopped running hours ago, but no one had unloaded it. I didn't touch a single thing. For once, I let the mess sit. Driving through Tacoma in the early light felt strange, like watching someone else's life through a windshield. I passed the same strip mall with the dry cleaners, the dog groomer, the old diner that changed owners 5 times but never the menu. Familiar, but suddenly distant. Like I'd been living in a version of myself that didn't quite belong. Back at my house, my real house, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No cartoons buzzing from another room, no little feet thudding across hardwood. Just the creak of my own floorboards and the click of the heater turning on. It wasn't a grand home, but it was mine. The kind of place where furniture stayed put, and the fridge didn't have anyone else's fingerprints. I dropped my bag by the front door and stood there a moment, unsure of what to do. My hands didn't know what to hold if they weren't holding something for someone else. I made tea out of habit, then forgot it on the counter. All I could hear was Tessa's voice in my head, repeating the words from the night before. Free babysitter? What else is she gonna do, really? I sat on the edge of my bed and let that line roll over me again and again, like a tide I couldn't stop. It wasn't just the insult, it was how easily it had come out of her mouth. Like I was no one. Like everything I'd ever done had just evaporated. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I let the sadness in. I didn't try to reason it away or distract myself with folding towels. I just sat in it, let it wrap around me like a wet coat. And for a little while, I felt completely, utterly alone. Later that afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Not a hurried knock. A neighbor's knock. It was Marla Greaves, my next-door neighbor for the past 22 years. She was holding a foil-wrapped plate and wearing that oversized Seahawks hoodie she always joked made her look like a retired linebacker. I brought waffles, she said, pushing past me like she always did. You look like you could use carbs. I didn't protest. I just followed her into the kitchen, where she set the plate down and made herself a cup of coffee like she owned the place. That was Marla, bossy in the gentlest way. She didn't ask why I was home. Not at first. We sat at the table, chewing in silence for a while. She talked about the neighbor down the street who was trying to grow lemons in this weather. I nodded along, grateful for the normalcy. Then she looked at me over her mug and said, "You're not just tired." What happened? I hesitated. Words sat heavy on my tongue. Finally, I said, "I'm just tired of being treated like I don't exist unless someone needs something." Marla leaned back in her chair, her face softening. "Yeah," she said, drawing the word out. "Been there." That surprised me. Marla had always seemed untouchable in that way, fiercely independent, unbothered. She shrugged. My oldest daughter once told a friend that I'd just floated around all day doing errands like a ghost. And I was paying her rent at the time. She smiled without humor. Sometimes, you have to vanish for them to see you existed. That line hit me square in the chest. I looked at her and whispered, I don't know who I am when I'm not taking care of them. Marla nodded slowly, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Maybe it's time to find out. That night, I didn't check my phone. I didn't open my email. I didn't ask how the kids were sleeping or what they ate for dinner. I let the silence stay. It was uncomfortable, yes, but honest. The messages started the next morning. At first, they were soft. Breezy. Like nothing had happened. Hey Mom, everything okay? We missed you at breakfast. Kids were asking for you. Let me know when you're ready to talk. I read them, one after the other, in the stillness of my kitchen, my tea growing cold in my hands. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't trust myself not to say something I'd regret. I needed quiet. I needed the weight of my own voice to settle before letting hers in again. Besides, I'd been quiet for decades. What was a few more hours? By the third day, her patience began to crack. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. It was just a joke, Mom. You're being overly sensitive. I mean, do you want me to grovel over something that wasn't even serious? There it was, the twist of the knife. Not anger, not remorse. Just irritation. Like my silence was an inconvenience she hadn't budgeted for. I turned off the phone and left it face down on the counter. I didn't need to see my reflection in the black screen, blurred, small, distorted. I already knew what I'd see, a woman who had spent years smiling past her own hurt, mistaking endurance for grace. I sat back in my chair and stared out the window. The maple tree in the yard had started to brown early this year, its edges curling like paper held too close to a flame. The kind of change you don't notice right away. But once it starts, you can't unsee it. A week passed in that slow, aching quiet. Then came the email. It wasn't from her, it was from the babysitting agency. A digital receipt, bright and unapologetic. 3 days of nanny coverage. Paid using my credit card. No call, no heads up, not even a thank you. Just an assumption. Like my wallet lived in her kitchen drawer along with the extra batteries and coupons. Like I was still there, even when I wasn't. I read the total, $364.50, and felt my chest tighten. It wasn't the amount. I would have given her twice that, if she'd just asked. But she hadn't. And somehow, that made all the difference. It wasn't just a financial transaction, it was symbolic. Of how easily I could be replaced, reduced, rerouted without a word. It was the confirmation of something I'd tried not to believe, that she didn't see me as a person with boundaries. Just a resource. Convenient. Familiar. Silent. I sat there, staring at that screen, and whispered out loud, I never taught her how to love back. Not because I didn't love her, but because I thought my sacrifices spoke loud enough. I thought consistency was clarity. I thought always saying yes meant I was being a good mother. But now, I saw it. I had modeled servitude, not self-respect. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me grieve. That night, I logged into my accounts and scrubbed my presents clean. Removed my card from the babysitting service, the grocery app, the Amazon account. Not in a fit of fury, but with quiet, deliberate hands. I wasn't punishing her. I was choosing me. Then I called Marla. Maple Sage? I asked. She didn't hesitate. Be there in an hour. I got dressed slowly, giving every small motion the care I usually reserved for other people. I pulled out the soft blue blouse I hadn't worn in years, the one with the mother-of-pearl buttons. It smelled like lavender sachets and long-forgotten versions of myself. Before I left, I stood for a moment on the porch. The roses by the step had gone a bit wild, spilling out of the planter like they didn't care who saw. Untamed, unapologetic. I smiled at them. Same, I whispered. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't revenge. It was something quieter. Like stepping into your own name after forgetting you had one. Maple sage always smelled like cinnamon. No matter the season, no matter the weather outside, that warm, spiced air wrapped around you the second you stepped in, like the place had made peace with time and decided to age sweetly. The bell over the door jingled the same way it had a decade ago, like it was greeting an old friend. Rachel, the barista, looked up and smiled. A little more silver at her temples now, but still the same woman who once handed me Americanos while I balanced Tessa on my hip and rattled off grocery lists under my breath. I gave her a small wave and made my way to the booth in the far corner. The one by the window, where the view was just the right kind of ordinary, sloping sidewalk, leaning mailbox, piles of rust-colored leaves drifting toward the gutter like canceled plans. I used to sit there with a baby monitor on the table and a pen in my teeth, trying to balance nap schedules and PDA forms. Now, it was just me. My hands folded in my lap. My chest quiet. Marla showed up like she always did, on time, unsentimental, wrapped in a maroon knit scarf that looked hand-spun and too warm for spring. She slid into the seat across from me without even taking off her coat, her eyes scanning me the way only a woman who's lived a few lives knows how. "You look tired," she said, stirring 2 packets of sugar into her coffee without so much as glancing down. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. Tired all the way through. I didn't deny it. "Yeah. I guess I am." We sat for a while without filling the silence. Outside, a teenager zipped by on a scooter with earbuds in. Across the street, someone scraped ice off a windshield even though the sun was out. It all kept moving, life, traffic, time. But I felt like someone had hit pause on mine. Then, without warning, Marla leaned forward. "If tomorrow were your last day on Earth, would you want to spend it being someone's live-in maid? Or in a place where you're treated like a mother?" I blinked at her. The question didn't feel harsh. It felt like a lantern being lit in a dark room I hadn't walked into for years. I ran my finger along the rim of my mug. I don't know who I am outside of all that. Outside of being needed. Being available. She didn't respond right away. Just let it hang. That kind of waiting, that patience, only comes from people who've stood at the edge of something and stepped back on their own terms. Eventually, the words came. Halting. Honest. When Tessa was 7, I got offered a job in Portland. Teaching position. Good salary, real benefits. I turned it down after her father died. She needed me more. Or that's what I told myself. I met her eyes. I thought giving up what I wanted was proof that I loved her. And now, she asked. Now, I exhaled, I wonder if I confused love with disappearing. Marla gave a slow nod, her fingers still wrapped around her mug. It's easy to do. Especially when no one teaches us the difference. I hesitated. Then added, I think I wanted her to be grateful. Not in a grand way. Just, to see me. She sees you, Marla said. She just doesn't know what she's looking at. That stung. Because it was true. I thought about all the small moments, the missed thank yous, the way Tessa would ask me to do things instead of asking how I was. The way I was always in the room, yet somehow never, there. She thinks I'll always come back, I whispered. Marla leaned back, like that settled something. And that's the story you've told her. For decades. It wasn't cruel. It was clear. I looked down at my hands. They used to be soft. Now they had the roughness of years that hadn't left time for lotion. Years spent holding others up. Years spent without being held. I keep thinking, I said, more to myself than to her, if I don't draw a line now, I never will. There it is, she said, smiling. That's the first honest thing you've said about what you want. We didn't speak much after that. Just let the moment stretch. Not empty, just full of something new. And before we stood to leave, I said it. Quiet. Certain. Maybe. I don't want to go back. Not like before. Marla nodded like she'd been waiting for me to catch up. Then don't. But know this, when you finally stand your ground, the people who've leaned on you the most will shake hardest. I smiled. Not because it was funny. But because it was true. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the covers pulled up to my chin, the ceiling fan murmuring overhead like it was trying to whisper me back to peace. But the house was too quiet, and my mind was too loud. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in that hot, reactive way I had been. That kind of anger burns quick and bright, then fizzles into ash. What was left now was something slower. Heavier. Like a stone I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing the weight, until now. Around midnight, I gave up. I padded to the kitchen, made a mug of tea I didn't touch, then wandered into the bathroom and stared into the mirror. The woman staring back at me was familiar, but altered. Her face was softer at the edges, worn not by time but by neglect. By years of putting herself behind everyone else. But there was something steadier in her reflection too. Something rooted. I didn't look away. If I don't speak now, I whispered, if I keep swallowing all of this like I always have, then when does it end? No one answered. But I knew the truth. It ends when I decide it does. The next morning, just past 10, there was a knock at the door. I hadn't been expecting anyone, but my stomach knew before my eyes confirmed it. There's a kind of weight to a knock that comes from someone hoping you'll open the door, not expecting it. I pulled it open. There stood Tessa. Dark circles under her eyes, hair swept into a half-done bun, a crumpled hoodie over leggings. She looked more girl than woman in that moment. Not unkind, just exhausted. Worn down. The kids stood on either side of her. Ella clutched a granola bar in one hand and my porch railing in the other. Caleb hid behind his mother's leg, peeking at me like I was a cartoon character that had stepped out of the screen. "Hey, Mom," she said. Her voice was small. Careful. I stepped aside and nodded. "Come in." The kids rushed past without hesitation, beelining for the old toy bin I kept in the corner of the living room. Blocks scattered, puzzle pieces flew, laughter returned to a room that hadn't heard it in days. I gestured for her to sit. She did, slowly, like she wasn't sure how to be in this version of my space, a version where I wasn't rushing to serve or soothe. She looked around the room, then down at her lap. "I didn't know who else to call," she said finally. "The sitter bailed, work's a mess, and I thought maybe we could talk." I didn't answer. Not yet. I just watched her, quietly. It wasn't cruel. It was new. She reached into her bag, pulled out a plain white envelope, and held it out. "It's just a little something. For all the help. I know I've taken too much for granted." I looked at the envelope. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I sat back in my chair and said, "I'm not angry about money." She paused, confused. "I'm not angry," I repeated. "But I won't take that." Her brows pulled in. "It's not a bribe or anything, I just thought." "I know what you thought," I said. My voice wasn't raised. If anything, it was softer than usual. "But I'm not something you can budget for, Tessa. I'm not a line item you outsource and then forget." The envelope sat untouched between us. A symbol of everything we'd never said. "I don't want repayment," I added. "I want recognition." She looked at me then, really looked. Her mouth opened to speak, but nothing came. For once, the space between us wasn't filled with explanations or excuses. Just truth. Just breath. I'm not saying I won't ever be there again, I said. But if you want me there, it has to be different. She swallowed. Different how? I show up when I'm invited, not expected. I help when it's asked, not assumed. And when I do, I want to be seen. Not used. There was a beat of silence. Then two. The kids laughed in the background, their voices rising and falling like little waves against the wall. I'm trying, she said quietly. I really am. I nodded. Then show me. She nodded too, her eyes glassy but not spilling over. I stood, walked to the window. The morning light hit the wooden floor just right, dust dancing in the beam like tiny reminders of everything that's always floating around us, unseen. I love you, I said without turning around. I love them. But I've spent so long forgetting to love myself. That was the moment. The shift. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. But honest. Behind me, she didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just let the words sit. And in that stillness, something unspoken passed between us. This was the line. Whether she'd cross it with care or not was hers to decide. But me? I'd finally drawn it. After they left, I stood in the middle of my living room, still as a chair left pulled out after dinner. The air felt oddly still. Not hollow, just cleared. Like a storm had passed through and taken the clutter with it. What remained was silence, but not loneliness. There was space now, and I didn't rush to fill it. That evening, I found myself reaching up to the top shelf of the hallway closet, the one with the scuffed shoebox marked in fading Sharpie letters. I hadn't touched it in years. The tape along the edges had yellowed, and dust clung to the corners like old guilt. Inside were pieces of another version of me. Folded notes, greeting cards, scraps of notebook paper with rushed handwriting. Most were from Mark, my late husband. Some dated back to before we got married, others from the early years, when Tessa was still little and the house still felt like a home instead of a holding pen. One letter in particular slid loose and landed on my lap. I recognized it instantly. He'd written it the night before his trip to Colorado, when he was offered a job we both knew he'd turned down. Tessa had just turned 5. I was working part-time at the library and taking night shifts at the grocery to cover insurance. In the letter, he wrote, I know you're giving up more than you say out loud. I see it, even if you pretend it's nothing. I just hope one day you'll remember who you were before the rest of us needed you so much. I remember reading that at the time and brushing it off. Thinking, he's tired. He doesn't know what he's saying. But sitting there now, knees tucked under me on the carpet, I finally understood what he meant. Not just about sacrifice, but about vanishing. I had made myself into something useful. Not beautiful, not radiant, not joyful, just useful. Predictable. Quiet. Available. And in doing so, I'd taught Tessa that love looked like self-erasure. That was never what I intended. But it was what I modeled. And now she was just following the blueprint I'd handed her. That thought didn't bring relief, but it brought clarity. A sharper sense of self, like something brittle had finally cracked, leaving clean lines behind. I picked up the phone. She answered before the second ring. Hi, Mom? Her voice was cautious, half guarded, half hopeful. I need to say something, I said. My voice didn't shake. It surprised me how steady it felt. Okay. I'm not coming back to your house, I said plainly. Not unless things change. There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing. The faint creak of floorboards told me she was pacing. I love you, Tessa. And I love those kids more than life. But I can't keep showing up for a version of myself that doesn't exist anymore. She didn't answer. So I kept going. I need 3 things from you. 1. Don't use my name to sign up for services, accounts, anything, unless you've talked to me first. 2. If you ask for my help, say thank you. That's all. Just acknowledgement. And 3. If either of those things feels too hard, then I will quietly step back. She let out a short, sharp breath. So now you have rules. I have boundaries, I said. Same difference. No, I said gently. Not the same at all. Rules are meant to control. Boundaries are how we protect love. She didn't respond right away. Then I heard a faint scoff. You always make yourself the victim. Do you even know how hard this is for me? Holding everything together while you act like folding some laundry is some kind of martyrdom. I let the words hit. I didn't deflect. I didn't apologize. Instead, I said, you know why I folded your laundry? Because I saw you drowning. But somewhere along the way, you stopped noticing I was there. And you never once asked if I could swim. There was another silence, deeper this time. Not defensive. Just stunned. Tessa, I said softly, I know you're under pressure. I know being a working mother is hard. But being your mother doesn't mean I stop being a person. Her voice was quieter now. You're really doing this? I am, I said. Because I don't want to vanish any more than I already have. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. For once, she didn't hang up. I could feel her on the other end of the line, not just hearing me, but beginning to listen. And even though she didn't say what I hoped she might, she also didn't shut me out. When I hung up, it wasn't with anger. It was with peace. I walked to the window and looked out at the maple tree in the yard. The wind tugged at its branches, bending them gently but never snapping them. A week slipped by like fog across glass, thick enough to blur, thin enough to see through if I tried. I kept expecting something, a call, a knock, a text filled with regret or rage. But nothing came. Not at first. Then, one morning, there it was. An email. Just sitting there between a newsletter from the library and a coupon from the garden center. Subject, I'm sorry, Mom. I stared at it like it might open itself. The words looked soft, but something in my gut told me not to get too close too fast. And sure enough, once I did open it, the truth of it unfolded like paper creased too many times. Polite. Measured. Careful. She said she missed me. Said she understood things had gotten out of hand. That she wanted to rebuild, her phrase, not mine, a relationship grounded in mutual care and respect. That sounded nice. Grown up. Like something pulled from a therapist's worksheet. But then the current shifted. She mentioned the kids had been sick. That her work deadlines were impossible. The sitter canceled, again. She'd barely been sleeping. And could I, just temporarily, come back to help her bridge the gap? She called it a shared journey of healing. I read that line 3 times. Not because it moved me, but because it felt like emotional marketing. Like the packaging was prettier, but the product inside hadn't changed. What she wanted wasn't healing. She wanted the version of me that always said yes. I didn't write back. Instead, I went to the drawer where I kept my old stationery, the good stuff. Creamy, thick, with my name embossed faintly at the top. I used to send thank you notes on that paper. Birthday cards. School permission slips. Things mothers did. I sat down, uncapped a pen, and wrote slowly. Each letter felt deliberate, like I was stitching something closed. I was once the mother you needed, but now I'm becoming the woman I forgot to be. That was all. No anger. No lesson. No defense. I folded the page, sealed it, and walked it down the block to the mailbox. The sun was out, and the air had that late afternoon sweetness to it, warm pavement, blooming hydrangeas, the faint smell of someone grilling a steak a few houses down. It felt like a world that had moved on, and maybe I finally had too. When I got home, I sat at the computer. Not out of impulse, but with clarity. I deleted the email account she always used to reach me. The one linked to my grocery deliveries, my calendar, the babysitting apps. I removed my name from the emergency contact list at the kids' school, logged out of the shared family photo folder, and called the bank to reissue my cards. It wasn't revenge. It was release. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't light any bridges on fire. I just walked off the bridge and stepped onto dry land for the first time in years. That evening, I went back to Maple Sage. There was comfort in the smell of cinnamon and old wood and dark roast coffee. Marla was already there, her scarf bunched up around her shoulders and a crossword puzzle half-filled in front of her. Her glasses sat crooked on her head like a crown someone forgot to straighten. She looked up and smiled in that way only people who really know you can. "You look lighter," she said. I slid into the booth across from her, folded my hands around the warm ceramic mug the barista had just placed down. "I think I am," I said. We didn't rush into conversation. We never did. It was the kind of friendship where silence had space to breathe. Around us, people chatted, spoons clinked, someone dropped a tray and laughed about it. Life moved. And for once, I didn't feel like I had to move with it. After a while, I said, almost without thinking, I thought I'd lost my family. But maybe I just found myself again. Marla smiled. Not the kind of smile that tries to fix or cheer. The kind that simply agrees, like a soft nod from the universe. She said, and maybe, just maybe, that girl of yours will finally learn how to love the kind of mother who knows her worth. It's been a month since I dropped that letter in the mailbox. Since then, my days have started to take on their own quiet rhythm, ones I choose, not ones handed to me. I cleared out the weeds in the backyard, the ones I'd always meant to get to but never quite did. I rejoined the book club at the downtown library, small group, mostly retired teachers like me. We argue about endings and pass around cookies, and it feels good to speak up without anyone interrupting. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I help out with the after-school program at the church, tutoring kids who've just arrived in the country and are still figuring out how to find the right page in a textbook. The house is still too quiet sometimes, but not in a lonely way. Just peaceful. Balanced. I don't talk about Tessa much. Not out of bitterness, just space. That part of my life is no longer the whole page. It's a corner now. A paragraph. Then, one Saturday morning, I heard a knock on the door. It was early. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the front steps were still slick with dew. I opened the door slowly, expecting a neighbor or maybe a delivery. It was Tessa. No kids. No bags. No awkward jokes or fake brightness. Just her. She stood there for a moment like she wasn't sure if she'd really meant to knock after all. Her hands were in the pockets of her coat, and she didn't meet my eyes right away. I waited. Finally, she looked up. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice quiet, not defensive. "But if there's ever a day you feel like visiting, not to help, not to work, just to sit, I'll have the tea ready." I didn't rush to answer. I didn't pull her into a hug or close the door on her, either. I just looked at her, really looked. And I saw her differently. Not as the child I had carried, or the woman who had taken me for granted. Just as a person. A person trying. So I nodded. A small, steady nod. It was enough. She turned and left without expecting anything more, and I watched her walk down the sidewalk with her shoulders just a little less tight. The next day, I didn't change my routine. I still went to the library, still worked on the garden. I didn't call her. But I also didn't delete the moment. She had taken a step. I had taken mine. The rest would come, or it wouldn't. But the foundation was mine again. And that mattered. Later that week, Marla and I met up at Maple Sage. Same booth by the window. Same cinnamon smell in the air. We shared a slice of banana bread and talked about a neighbor's runaway cat that came home after 3 weeks like nothing had happened. When the barista came by and asked for our names to write on the cups, I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I knew how I wanted to be known. Iris, I said. Just Iris. She wrote it down, spelled it right, and called it out a few minutes later like it was the most natural thing in the world. And when I took that cup in my hands, I felt it, not as a label or a role or a responsibility, but as me. You know, sometimes I wonder how many of us spend our whole lives being needed, but not really seen. We give, we bend, we stay quiet, thinking that's what love is supposed to look like. And maybe for a while, it works. Until one day, it doesn't. I'm not angry anymore. Just softer. Wiser, maybe. I still love my daughter. I love my grandkids more than I can say. But I've also learned that love without respect will hollow you out. So now, I choose peace. I choose the little things, my garden, quiet mornings, good coffee with old friends. And I choose myself. Have you ever felt that shift in your own life? That quiet moment when you realize it's okay to ask for more? If this story spoke to something in you, I hope you'll join me again next time. We've all got stories to tell, and maybe, just maybe, someone needs to hear yours too.